to this week's guest in a minute. But first, join our community by hitting the subscribe button and the bell so as soon as we post a new guest, you get it right away. And don't forget to hit the like and share buttons because that helps us grow the show. So welcome. Hit the subscribe button and let's get to this week's guest. Hey, hockey fans, welcome to the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm Gino Retta. I have spent over 4 decades working in the game. Fortunate enough to meet some of the great legends of the game, saw them come into the league, watched them shine in the game, and now they've moved on to life after the game. The 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast gives us a chance to catch up, tell some great stories, relive some great memories, and hear what they're up to today. On this week's show, the first goalie picked in the 1989 NHL Draft who spent 17 seasons in the NHL, a 2-time All Star. He also won the Vezina as the best in the game. Played 719 NHL games, all but 9 of them for the Washington Capitals. Here's a great one. He's a German citizen, born in South Africa, raised in Canada, now lives in the United States. We're talking about, of course, our buddy Olaf Kolzig. Ollie, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us, my friend.
Gino, thanks for having me. A friend of mine actually termed the phrase Germafricadian.
Germafricadian.
Germafricadian. That's kind of my nationality.
Explain this to our audience who's saying, okay, how did he end up in South Africa? How did he end up in Canada and the States? Give us the backdrop to that.
So my parents were German, and when they were finished school, they were both in the hotel industry, and my dad's first job was down in Johannesburg, and him and my mom got married there, and I was born shortly after. I was only there 2 years. We moved to Copenhagen for a year, and then I moved to Edmonton when I was 4. And my dad introduced me to the game of hockey, and ended up playing for a number of years minor hockey before I got drafted. I was listed by the New Westminster Bruins of the Western League back in 1987. They subsequently moved down to Tri-Cities, Washington, and that's where I started playing. I got drafted by the Caps, ended up playing those number of years, and now married an American girl and got my American citizenship back in what was it now? 99, 2000. So yeah, it's a strange background.
Are you still involved a lot with the Caps? I know you for a while there, you were a goalie coach and player development coach with the Caps. Are you still involved at that level?
Yeah, still doing player development. I'm out down in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where our AAA team is, and sorry, I'll say American Hockey League team now that I'm talking to the Canadian audience. When I'm talking American audience, that's how I kind of the relation. So yeah, I'm down in the American League with Hershey, and then down in the ECHL with the South Carolina Stingrays, where our prospects are.
It's interesting because I want to talk to you about a couple of different areas about player development. One is your own development and how that was, and the stuff that you learned from that. Because in fairness, it wasn't really an easy journey for you in the early years. And also, you were a big part of being there for the early days of Ovi. When he spent I think you spent better part of 3 seasons playing with Ovi when Ovi broke into the league. Let's start with the Ovi thing. You saw this kid break into the NHL right after the lockout season. He breaks into your and there's all kinds of anticipation of what this guy's going to do because he's an international player. And now he's coming close to Gretzky's all-time. As we're recording this, he's still a few off of Gretzky's all-time NHL goal scoring mark. As a goalie who was facing this kid during practices, as a guy who was his teammate for the first 3 years in the NHL, did you see this coming right off the bat?
As far as getting close to Gretzky's record, no, I don't think anybody.
In terms of his ability to score.
Oh yeah. He was just one of those guys that the puck just came off his blade so much different. It was harder. It's a little more accurate now than it used to be. He was just swinging for the fences early on, and him and I had a few conversations after practice about, buzzing the tower and
I was going to say, were you finding him buzzing the tower in practices?
Oh yeah. But it was a different mindset coming from Europe, and and that was the great thing about Ovi. I met him actually during the lockout. I was playing in the German league for Berlin, and he happened to be in Cologne at the same time I was playing a game, and so we got introduced to each other. And I knew right away there was just something about him. Most Russians, most Europeans, when you first meet them, they're a little standoffish. They're not, they don't maybe trust you. The language barrier, but he was a big smile on his face. His English wasn't really good at all, but he knew who I was, and so we had a connection right away. And then, a year and a half later, when he first came to training camp, he wanted a room with the North American guys so he could learn the language, he could learn the culture. He was a big personality, even though he was a rookie, and we knew he was going to be a great player. He had a big personality in the room, um, and just was an exuberant kid. And so this was back when we were rebuilding and we went through some lean times. It was just great to have that youthful energy back in the room. And I think a lot of us just fed off, especially us old guys who, it was a tough couple of years. And so now we saw some light at the end of the tunnel. And so I think he just elevated everybody. But you could tell that from the very first game against Columbus, you knew this kid was special. And not this special where he's going to break a record that I don't think anybody in their right mind was going to get broken. But that's just kind of the guy he is and how impactful he's been for the Caps.
It's amazing because we've seen some trends, and I love the fact that you're talking about this in terms of what we've seen. So Ovi comes to the league, he scores 52, 45, and then 65, which is insane. I mean, pre-Ovi, a decade before that, that wasn't that unusual to be in those kind of numbers, but no one scored 65 since then. Now, Auston Matthews is, as we're recording this, creeping in on being able to accomplish that. Did you, two questions there. Did you expect that it'd be this long a gap before we saw somebody score 65 again in a season? And did you think that Auston Matthews could be the guy that could challenge that number?
The 65 or the Gretzky one?
The 65. I know the Gretzky one to me is longevity. It's
longevity, right? Exactly.
Scoring 25, 30 every season. You're around long enough. Ovi's not. If he has to retire at 45, he's going to retire at 45. He's going to get the record. We know that.
Yeah. As far as Auston Matthews goes, I mean, didn't he score 4 goals in his first game against Ottawa I mean, right away, there was a big hype, obviously, but he was playing over in Switzerland, and so you didn't really get to see him day in, day out. But there was a big hype about him, and then obviously the first game, you're like, whoa, who is this kid? And I don't know that I don't know. I thought anybody would score 65 again in today's game. Especially, and this is not a knock against the goalies of the past, because the position has just evolved immensely, and these kids are getting coaching and training at such a young age. But these goalies are so good and so big. And I get it, these shooters are good, but to get 65 against these guys now, it's amazing. It really is. But yeah, he's a kid I could definitely see doing it. Connor McDavid, if he didn't have such a slow start this year, the way the Oilers are playing, could be another guy. But I don't know. It still remains to be seen.
I want to get back. Speaking of player development, I want to get back to your transition in the NHL. And you, Sean, you accomplished some amazing things. You won the Vezina. You got a lot of wins in your NHL career, but it was a humble beginning. It was a humble beginning. You first rounder in 1989, which, at that time, you just don't do that. You don't roll the dice on a goalie in the first round because you never know how the guy's going to turn out. Let me take you back to a humbling experience for you. You're 19 years old. You break camp with the Caps. You're there. Game number 2.
Game?
Sorry, the Leaf game.
Go ahead. Leaf game. So yeah, this is my second start. Obviously, I grew up in Toronto. I played a lot of my minor hockey in the MTHL, and I was getting my first start at Maple Leaf Gardens, where I went as a kid, and I watched Mike Palmateer, Darryl Sittler, Boris Salming, all the legends, and I was 19 years old. It was my second game. I surprised a lot of people by making the Caps right out of my first training camp. And I was in awe, but I think once the first few minutes of the game went by, I started getting settled in. And I think at the time we had a 4-1 lead. I was making some saves. I was playing well. And it was 4-1 halfway through the second period. And by the time the final buzzer rang in the third, it was 8-4. And then a few days later, I got sent back to Tri-Cities. But it was, that's when I realized I had a long ways to go. Not so much physically, but mentally. And I think there was a part of me in that game that kind of thought, hey, this is pretty easy, you know. And then I remember, I think Ally Afraidy took a slap shot from the blue line in the third that the puck was already on its way out before I even reacted. And I'm like, this is a different animal. And yeah, it was an eye-opening experience, to say the least.
But in fairness, though, now in your role as a goalie coach, you would never throw a 19-year-old into a situation like that because they like forwards can make the jump if you're really, really elite. Defensemen, no way. It's going to take about 3 or 4 years to kind of work your way in. And then from a goalie perspective, unless the guy's 24, 25 years old, there's just no way you would throw a goalie in a situation like that, would you?
Not nowadays, no. And I think back then it was a little bit different. You know, with what Tom Barrasso did with Buffalo, coming to get drafted out of high school and then winning the Vezina and the Calder's first year. And I had a really good training camp. I mean, I'm not here to pump my tires, but I had a really good training. We went to Russia. I think it was the first year that the NHL went over to the Soviet Union at the time, and we did our tour there. And I myself and Byron Defoe, we kind of two young guys that drafted 1-2 that summer before, and we battled it out. We both had tremendous camps. And they
You
decided,
are pretty good buddies, right? Weren't you best
yeah,
man?
oh yeah. No, we not at the time. Because he played for Portland, I played for Tri-Cities, and we hated each other. I thought he was, you know, just I hated the Portland Winterhawks at the time. So we didn't really like each other. And then when he got drafted, I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. And then we went to Russia that fall, and we became obviously we were the only two young guys there, so we became best friends. And you know, since then we're best men at each other's weddings. We're godfathers to each other's sons. It's ironic, both of us have sons that are autistic. So there's just a huge connection that him and I have. And but yeah, so we had great camps, and they decided to keep me. And just, you know, for them it was like, okay, well, let's keep the kid for a couple of weeks, and you know, if he doesn't pan out, then we'll send him back. And it didn't pan out. And the problem was for me, I went back and I didn't go back with a bad attitude. I went back with the wrong attitude. I went back thinking, oh, hey, I just made the NHL. You know, I'm playing against all these guys and stopping them, and it's going to be a walk in the park for me coming back to junior. Well, fast forward 30 years now, the role I'm in, you don't realize then that every league that you go below the NHL it's more scrambly. Guys don't do their jobs as well. And, you know, there's a reason why these guys play in the NHL, because they're the best at what they do. And if you can, and I tell the goalies this, it's actually easier to play in the NHL than it is to play in the American League or the Coast or even in junior, because you've got 5 guys in front of you that do their jobs very well. And if once you come up to speed on the puck and you read the play, you can play in the NHL. And but anyway, I went back and I got my ass handed to me the year I went back. And then I went to training camp thinking, okay, I made it the year before, make it again. And I didn't see the NHL bench again for another 3-4 years. So fast forwarding now to player development, player development wasn't really a thing back then. You know, we had a director of player personnel, which is, you know, a guy that would just go travel around and see the prospects and talk with them. But you didn't have a guy like we have myself, Steve Richmond, Brooks Orpik, and Jim Slater. So all of us played. Steve played a little further back in the day, and but you know, Jimmy and Brooks are all recent players. So we have great, I guess, appreciation for the game and what it took to come up. And so these kids are able to reach out to us and talk with us. And when they're going through some tough times, or, you know, the biggest thing we tell them is, you know, you're not necessarily as bad as people say you are, and you're definitely not as good as people say you are. So we try to keep them even keel, you know. And then I think as soon as players establish that even keel, that's when they become consistent players. And then that's what NHL teams want. They want consistent guys that they can rely on, shift in, shift out, night in, night out.
Yeah. And you had the journey, man. I think it was probably over a period of 8 years. You wrapped up your junior career at Tri-City. You played in the A with Baltimore Skipjacks, the Hampton Road Admirals in the ECHL, Rochester Americans, the Portland Pirates. Were there times in that journey where you went, do I really want this as a lifestyle? Is this really what I want? Or did you always know it's only a matter of time? I'm going to get back there and then I'm going to stick.
It wasn't so much that actually the lifestyle was great no matter where you were at. You're getting, I mean, I'm coming from junior making, $200 a month to, back then the minor league salary wasn't great, but it felt like a lot of money at the time. You were independent, you were on your own. There wasn't a point where I was like, I don't really want to do this. For me, it was more, okay, when are you going to make the decision to once there's an opening, you're going to take the ball and run with it. I mean, there were numerous times where I was given a chance, whether it was when Don Beaupre at the end of his career with us, or when Jim Carrey was there. There was always a moment where someone was struggling, and I was given an opportunity to establish myself or take the ball and run with it, and I always dropped it. And so for me, it had to become a mental mindset, and I needed to become stronger mentally. I was too emotional, and I had to channel that emotion into a different direction. And once I grasped that, and a lot of that had to do once Dave Pryor got hired by the Capitals. It was kind of the same year George McPhee got hired as a GM, Ron Wilson got hired as head coach, and then they brought in Dave Pryor as a goalie coach. And Dave and I worked together with the German national team. And him and
Was
I
it the first time you ever had a real goalie coach?
A day in, day out goalie coach, yes. I had Mitch Korn for a little bit when I was in Rochester, when I got loaned out to Buffalo. And, all the credit in the world to Mitch, because I mean, I was a Washington product, and he was hired by Buffalo. But when he came down to Rochester, he gave me every bit of time as he did the guys that were there from Buffalo. So Mitch, I would say, was my first real goalie coach, but I saw him sparingly, but he definitely helped me out tremendously. But Dave Pryor, when he came in, Dave had a way, and it wasn't so much a physical thing with Dave getting me to change my game positionally and physically. With Dave, he had such a calm demeanor that he got me in a good place where bad goals didn't affect me, or lack of playing time didn't piss me off, or whatever. I was just able to just focus on hockey and doing what I could do. I mean, I was a big guy, I was athletic, and I wasn't using that to my fullest abilities. And so Dave was able to get me to do that. And once I did that, once it clicked between my ears, that's kind of when my career took off.
That's awesome. And then you end up being a backup to Jim, the net detective, Jim Carrey. A pretty solid start there as a backup, and then you earn the starting role. Jim.
Yeah, and again, it comes full circle. The beginning of my ascent was Maple Leaf Gardens. It was 88, 89, sorry, 98, 97, 98. And Bill Ranford had gotten traded the year before. And so Bill and I both had really good training camps, but Bill obviously was a veteran. And so he was named the starter. And so first period in opening night, Bill took a shot in the Family Jewels, and ended up couldn't finish the game. Like, it got him bad enough where it just, he, after the first period, said, I can't go. We were up 5-0 at the time. Now, most goalies, when they go in the net, feel pretty confident with 5-0 lead. But with everything that happened to me, and not just the one start I had in Toronto at the beginning, I had another start where I blew up my kneecap. And so Toronto, the Maple Leaf Gardens, for me, from a playing perspective, wasn't a great building. And so I went in there, not the most confident guy with a 5-0 lead, but ended up winning the game. We won 5-1. I think just playing well in that game just got rid of so many demons, and I just started playing so much more freely the next night, and I just took the ball and ran with it. Finally took it, kept it, and didn't look back, and became an all-star that year. It was my first Olympics in Nagano with German national team, and we went to the finals that year. Unfortunately lost to Detroit, but that was obviously my breakout season.
I've heard you refer to it as your dream season. Is that a pretty accurate way of describing it?
You'd have to think so. Yeah. The Vezina year was pretty good too. The only thing about that, we laid an egg in the playoffs, but yeah, that was definitely one of those special years that you remember. Even though we didn't win it, the journey that we took with those guys, and the teammates I had that year, and unfortunately one of them just passed away a few days ago, Chris Simon, but the group that we had that year was just the characters and how tight we were, and it was just a shame that we couldn't win it. But to me, it'll always seem like a Stanley Cup winning team, despite not winning it because of what we went through and how tight we were. It was just one of those years that you just don't forget.
Didn't take long for the nickname to catch on, which I guess is kind of obvious, Ollie the Goalie. But do you ever remember where the source of it came from? Where did it actually start?
Ollie the Goalie started when I was it started when I was when I was playing the NTHL. I was a defenseman, and one of the games that we were playing, our goalie didn't show up. I don't know if it was for weather reason or whatever, but so our coach said, "Hey, we need somebody to play net," and so I guess I volunteered. I'm not sure why, but I volunteered, and I was, God, what was it, nine at the time?
You realize that parents are pissing off at this point?
What's that?
They've got kids who are goalies who've been goalies since 4 years old, and you didn't even start playing in net till 9 and played in the NHL, went to the Cup Finals, won the Vezina. You realize how many parents are like, that's not the way it's supposed to work.
But that's parents nowadays. Back then, like, it was always like the kids didn't really want to play net. It wasn't that desirable. I mean, you had brown leather, there weren't masks, like it wasn't as appealing. So anyway, I went in, I got a shutout that game, and I had, everybody's patting me on the back, telling me how great this was. And I'm like, God, this isn't bad. I could do this. And so I ended up switching my position. And then it wasn't until I got one game I got lit up, and everybody's telling you how crappy you are. And you're like, ooh, maybe I made the wrong decision. But anyway, even before that, the ironic thing is when I started playing hockey, my dad introduced it to me when we moved to Edmonton. And we, all the kids back in the day, remember Edmonton, you'd play out in the outdoor rinks. And mid-January in Edmonton is not a very pleasant time, very, very cold. And so it was my turn to play net, and it was a god-awful cold night. And I remember this kid was going to coming down on me on a breakaway. And I said, there is no way I'm getting hit with this puck. I skated out from behind the net and hid behind the net. And everybody was like, okay, he's not meant to play goal. And so anyway, fast forward, it ended up, when I tell that story, people are just laughing. And
gold. I wish there was cell phone video of that.
But it's like, kids, you play street hockey, you don't want to get hit with that orange street hockey ball. Like, it's not pleasant.
Yeah, man. I played in net. I don't know if you can see it, but
I see the old Don.
I wore the old Arthur's Herbe, and the mask broke in my face in an outdoor game, and I was bleeding all the way down my face. As you're doing this, you're like, what am I thinking? What am I thinking? Why am I? This is crazy. This doesn't make any sense. I want to get back to, you were talking about guys that you played with, and it is obviously a very tragic loss, losing Chris Simon. Another guy that you played with on that team, a buddy of mine, and obviously a buddy of yours, Keith Jones. Jonesy's done real well for himself now with the Philadelphia Flyers, and I was just with him a couple of weeks ago, had a great chat. One of the only, I'm not surprised Jonesy's successful. What I am surprised is that the guy with this kind of sense of humor, he's weird, he's quirky, he's hilarious, but there is one of my all-time favorite pranks was something you guys did to him. Explain to our audience the fish story in his car.
Just to lift the fish. So Jonesy was a bit of a prankster back in the day, and we had characters. We had Dale Hunter, we had Craig Berube, we had Joe Reekie, Phil Housley. We had just a bunch of characters, and so Callie Johansson, and Jonesy was not afraid to give it to people, needle guys, and so it got to a point where Dale Hunter had enough, and he was gonna get Jonesy, and so he talked with Callie, and obviously Callie's from Sweden and has access to this luftefish, which is just the stinkiest fish on the planet.
I love the fact you guys felt like you had to go overseas to bring in a fish.
Oh yeah, we imported our gags, but so and Jonesy had this Mitsubishi 3000 GT. He just came out of, I think it was Western Michigan or wherever he played, and he's coming into town, and Jonesy's personality, right? He's not shy. He's confident. Love being. I actually was his roommate for a year. But so anyway, he comes in and he's cruising around in this new Mitsubishi sports car, and Dale had said, okay, I have enough. I'd had enough. And so they imported this lufta fish. So one day in practice, they had one of our NHL security guys help us out. And so they got the keys to his car, they opened up his car, they they took a drill, they undid all the bolts, they lifted the carpet. It wasn't just like the floor mat that you lift up. They lifted up the carpet and they put this fish underneath the carpet and then put the bolts back in. And this is like springtime. Springtime in DC can be anywhere from, 60 to 80 degrees. And so we're in practice and it was a warm day and Jonesy's, going home. And so anyway, it's like 3, 4 days go by and he comes into the rink and he's like, I don't know what the hell is going on. My car absolutely stinks. I've had it detailed. I've had people look at it. They just have no idea what's going on. And so this thing went on for like a week. And Huntsy finally had enough. He just couldn't take it anymore. And so he told Jonesy what had happened. And so from that point on, the pranks just kept rolling. And then there was one year where we came home from a road trip and we'd have to take the bus from the airport back to our practice rink. And Jonesy had talked to the same security guy, and we had Huntsy's pickup put up on blocks, but just to the point where if you look with a blind eye, you couldn't tell that it was lifted. And so we're all getting in our cars and we're just sitting there watching. Dale gets in, he puts it in reverse, and all of a sudden, the wheels are just spinning. He's there for about 2 hours getting the truck jacked up and getting the blocks out, and it's already 2 in the morning getting back from a game. So Dale didn't get back until 4 in the morning. But it was just such a fun team, and those, I mean, they're harmless pranks, but the impact they have it was fun. It was hilarious.
It was fun, and it was amazing to watch the stuff that you did in your 1999-2000 season where you won the Vezina. You started 74 games that year. 74 games, man. In today's NHL, if a guy goes over 55 in the world of platooning, if he goes over 55, you're like, oh, he's going to be exhausted. He won't be any good for the playoffs. 74 games you started that year. Can you imagine trying to do that to a guy now?
Yeah, no, it was a different time. I mean, I was actually I was a player that was almost built like a defenseman. I mean, back then we didn't have position specific workouts. I mean, when you got a workout, you were doing the same workout as a D-man and as a forward, and I was a big guy to begin with, so I had a lot of extra reserve, and so from a physical standpoint, I could play those games, and that was back in the day where the Tampa Bay Lightning just come in, Florida Panthers just there was a lot of expansion, and so Atlanta Thrashers just came in, so there were a lot of nights where you didn't have to be your best because of the opposition that you were playing. Like you could have a bad night and still win 5-4 against an expansion team. The parity in the league is so great now that you have to be on every night. Any team could beat anybody. Last place team could be the first place team, and we see it all the time. And so from a mental standpoint, I don't think guys can play 74 games. I think physically they're all in great shape. The training, they're all zero body fat. Like these guys are prime athletes, but it's from a mental standpoint that you need to give them a rest, and that's why.
I want to ask you something about a mental thing, and you can give us some insights here that not a lot of guys can. We were talking before about when Ovi came in. You saw Ovi came in as a kid, and he had obviously up at that point played all his games in Russia. There was somebody else who came in, I think it was just a year after Ovi, Alexander Semin, who had really made his mark in Russian hockey international. And we were all wondering whether or not he's going to come, and people were talking about him. He's the next Ovi. He could be even better. And then it never really, he had some flashes of greatness, but never really panned out for him the way we anticipated. What's your thought on this kid as you saw him come in?
So he was actually the first Ovi. We had him. He played for us in Portland the year before we got Ovi, or the year before the lockout, and he didn't enjoy it at all. And so after the season, he went back to Russia. And
yeah, but you saw him locally in the minors, but we never saw him in the NHL.
Oh yeah. But anyway, so then Ovi gets drafted, and then Alex changes his mind and he wants to come back over and play. Right, he's a fellow countryman, and in my opinion, this is my opinion. I think Semin was a more talented player.
Wow.
But Ovi's desire, his enthusiasm, he wants to play hockey. He loves playing hockey. Alex didn't have that. Semin didn't have that. He was a talented kid. Um, didn't want to integrate himself with the team. Didn't want to, learn the language quite as fast as Ovi did. I'm not saying he was a bad kid. He just wasn't as, I guess, we were spoiled from what we got with Ovi that, maybe we thought Ovi would rub off on him, and it just never was the case, which is too bad because, had we had him, I mean, it would have been like it probably would have been better than say a Crosby Malkin combination. I mean, we had Nicky Backstrom, who was our, you could say was our Crosby or our Malkin, but from a pure scoring perspective, to have those two guys on the same lineup would have been unbelievable.
Yeah. Forgive me for this, but you had mentioned your son's autistic and Byron Defoe's son's autistic, and I wanted to chat about that because I know you're pretty open about that. I remember back, I think it was 05, 06, where you won the King Clancy Award. And whenever something like that happens, we're like, oh, what did he do in leadership to make this happen? So from a national perspective, from an international perspective, we didn't really understand your involvement or why you were involved. But you were involved with autism at that point, leading programs. Explain to our audience, to the point where you would feel comfortable, how you got involved, why that was so important to you, and what your own personal experiences were with that.
I'm very comfortable with it. I'm very open with it. But it was so our son was born in 2001, and 15 months later, my wife took him to his 15-month appointment, and we were new parents at the time. There wasn't really anything that we saw. We just took him for his appointment, but we had a pediatrician at the time who was very well educated in the world of autism, which was rare back then. And he noticed some things and asked us some questions, and he just said that it's not a typical development that your son's going through. And he said, I suggest you go to the Children's National Medical Center in DC and see a specialist, because I think he's on the autism spectrum. And I mean, back then, when just kind of, you hear that, you're thinking Rain Man, Dustin Hoffman, and the way, and that character that he played, and so we got the diagnosis, and that's the first part of the nightmare. You don't know, what to do. The second part of the nightmare is trying to find the resources for your son.
Hmm.
And you get on the internet, and it's just overwhelming because, and I use this comparison. They're not the same, because one is you could die from, the other one obviously you can't. But when you get cancer, there's a protocol, and this is what you do, this is what you do, and if that doesn't work, then this is what you do. There's only a handful of steps. So it's daunting in the fact that you have this disease that could kill you, but you've got direction. With autism, not every set of therapies works for the same child. And so, you're seeing and they say the first 5 years of brain development is the most important. So it was vital for us to get this going and find the right things for him. And it was just frustrating and tough to get those right things. The one saving grace is my buddy Stu Barnes played with Scott Mellenby in Florida, and Scott has a son, Carter, who's autistic. And so he put me in touch with Scott, and Scott we had a sobering conversation, and he didn't sugarcoat it at all. He said, it's going to be hard. But the one thing that Scott, he kind of directed me in certain ways, who to talk to, who to see. And that helped a ton. And so after we got my son going and working, and my wife and I had sat there and we talked about, so I was fortunate because I have resources because of what I do. There's not many families that are in my position, and for them to go through this, it's got to be so much harder. And so we put an organization. What's that?
And expensive.
Well, definitely expensive. And so we put an organization together named the Carson Kolzig Foundation, named after my son, where we wanted to help these families and guide them in the right, so they get the diagnosis, and then we help fund a center back in Tri-Cities, the Responding to Autism Center. And it was a place where you could go certain days of the week. There'd be a neurologist there that could assess your child, give him a diagnosis if he has it, and then direct them in these certain areas, who to talk to, and so you get the ball rolling, so you get those things going, so they can change the neural pathways in your brain and make life a lot more tolerable for the individual. And then it went from that. Shortly after that, Byron's son got diagnosed, and then we were talking, and I put him in touch with Scotty, and so we talked about putting a group together. And at the time, we called it Athletes Against Autism. Just more so for the acronym AAA, right? AAA baseball, AAA hockey, whatever. It just had that common connection with sports. Having said that, we probably should have said Athletes for Autism. Advocating that it's not a bad thing, and that we're here for you. And anyway, we put the group together. We branched off of Autism Speaks, and it was a very successful number of years. We ended up recruiting Ernie Els. There's a number of other athletes that got involved, and then unfortunately, the recession in 2008 not only hit individuals in everyday life, but in those nonprofit organizations as well. And so they had to streamline, and unfortunately, our group was cut off from them. And but we did a number, like for 4 or 5 years, we did a number of great things and raised a lot of money, raised a lot of awareness, and so yeah, I'm obviously a big advocate for kids with autism.
Statistically speaking, there's probably somebody out there right now watching or listening to us right now, either who is on the autism scale or has a child who's on the autism scale, and they're wondering, where do I start? Where do I begin? What would you suggest them? I mean, you don't have to give them a specific website or like that, but what is the mindset you suggest to them, first steps to take that you were helped with years ago that were effective for you?
So the first step I'm going to tell people right now is if you're in denial, it's the worst thing that you could do for your child. Get on whatever there's so many autism websites out there now that can guide you and tell you the first necessary things to get done. What's the severity of the autism? My son's high functioning, so he was able to take a lot more information in, and he's going to live with us for the rest of his life, but there's a sense of independence with him. Not a lot of families have that. Scotty's son, unfortunately, wasn't quite as high functioning. But yeah, be proactive, because even if down the road it was a misdiagnosis, it's better to be over prepared than to let these 3-4 years of vital development slide by, because the what's going to happen to your child moving forward isn't going to be as enjoyable. So be proactive.
Awesome. Ollie, this is it's been so fun catching up with you, man. You look great. You sound great. Before you take off, I want to play 5 fast facts with you. Okay. I'll throw 5 quick questions at you. You give me the first thing that comes to your mind when you get that. Okay. Because these are things that people often wonder that don't get a chance to ask. So I'm going to ask them for you. Okay. Time now for 5 fast facts with Ollie the Goalie, Olaf Kolzig. Best teammate you ever played with, and why?
My God, they come right out of the gate swinging. Geez. There's not one. Honestly, I can't say it. Jeff Halpern, Craig Berube, Dale Hunter, Chris Clark, because they're all just fantastic people.
Best coach you ever played for?
Best coach I ever played for. You know what? I'm going to say John Brophy. Played with him in Hampton Roads. Obviously, old school guy. Just had a lot of watching him as a Leafs fan growing up behind the bench with his bolo tie. He kind of, big white hair, red face when he got mad. He was special.
He was, especially that day where he cracked his head and had the blood trickling down. If you, Oli and I know what we're talking about, Google it later after we're done, and you'll see what we're talking about. It's a classic image. Who did you hate playing against the most, and why?
Oh boy, there's a handful there. Sean Avery, Len Barry, just those ratty guys with those smirks on their face that they're good players, but they're just there to get under your skin, and they have a look and they have a way of doing it, and I can't explain it, but there's a reason why they're rats, and they're loved to be hated.
You spent your whole career, almost your entire career, playing for the Caps. What was your favorite NHL city to play in that wasn't Washington?
That wasn't Washington. I only played one
as a visitor. As a visitor.
As a visitor. Yeah. That wasn't Washington. Montreal or New York. Madison Square Garden and the Bell Center are my two favorite places.
If you hadn't, this is our final question. If you hadn't become an NHL player, what do you think plan B was for a career for Olaf Kolzig?
So I wanted to get into sports medicine. I really did. I had an offer to go to Dartmouth University back way back in the day, but back then I had dreams of playing hockey, and back then playing in the CHL was the best way of doing that. And but no, sports medicine for sure. Didn't know at the time that I was going to have a lot of hands-on training moving forward the rest of my career with all the injuries I had. But no, science and medicine was something I was kind of intrigued with. Fast fact, did you know what team did I retire with in the NHL?
I'm sorry, what team you retired with in the NHL?
Yeah. Who did I retire with? What team? Oh.
Is that you're asking me that?
I'm asking you that. Do you know?
No, I would assume the Caps, but clearly wrong.
Toronto Maple Leafs.
Oh yeah, but you never played for them.
I never did what these guys are doing now, where I signed a one-day contract with the team that I played for the majority of my time and retired with them. So I actually retired as a Toronto Maple Leaf.
That's an offside thing. I knew you'd. I knew you were.
People know that
you were a Leaf on paper, but you never played.
That was the strangest time of my life. I got traded in Toronto, in Tampa. If you got time,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I was in Tampa. I tore my biceps tendon. It was one of the worst years. I should have retired the year before. Anyway.
Would you play 8 games with them? I think you played 8 games with Tampa, right?
Played 8 games with them. Tore my biceps tendon. Ended up helping Rick Tocchet out as a goalie coach the rest of the year. But anyway, so I get traded before the deadline as a salary dump. But I didn't have to go to Toronto. I stayed in Tampa. I actually hosted the year-end party for the Lightning that year. But so Toronto comes to town. I was probably a month later. Toronto comes to town. And I don't know why I felt the need. I had to go see them. I don't know why. I hadn't gone up there anyway. So it was the weirdest thing. I walk in the rink. I walk by the Lightning dressing room. I go into the locker room. And I got all these guys looking at me like, "Can we help you? Like, what are you doing?" And I just remember I just started sweating, and I was talking with Cujo, and then who else was there at the time? Was it Gerber? Martin Gerber? Was he there? Might have been him. Anyway, I'm like, okay, I've had enough. I actually went into the coach's room because Ron Wilson and Tim Hunter were there, and I had way more history with those two guys than anybody in the dressing room. So I spent the next hour in the locker room there, and I think I stayed for a period of the game and then I left. But I don't know. I still to this day have no idea why I went. But the only time I went to Toronto was I flew up in May to get medically cleared, and then that fall I announced my retirement. But it didn't even dawn on me to reach out to the Caps and say, "Can I sign a one-day contract?"
Well, I mean, yeah, you had to retire as a guy. I mean, that's all we know you as.
I know.
You had a cup of coffee in Tampa. You didn't even have a coffee. Maybe you had a beer in the coach's room with the Leafs, but that's it.
That's it.
Well,
and I didn't even put creamer in my coffee in Tampa.
I know. You know what? Now we know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey. Yeah. Ollie, I'm so glad you're doing so well, buddy. Thank you so much for taking this time to talk to us. We really appreciate it. It's been great catching up with you. And I know you're on Victoria Island visiting family. Enjoy it. We appreciate it.
It's always great catching up with you.
Former Vezina winner and current goalie coach and player development coach of the Washington Capitals, Ollie the Goalie, Olaf Kolzig.
The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by 7-Eleven and Athletes Care. Before leaving the rink, order your favorite Slurpee, fresh 100% premium Arabica coffee, hot from the oven pizza and wings, pint of ice cream, or even a carton of milk, a dozen eggs, a loaf of bread from the 7NOW app, and Team 7-Eleven will have your order ready for pickup 24/7. Athletes Care is proud to be celebrating its 25th year, offering sports medicine services to both elite athletes and the general population who require rehab for a new or chronic injury or pain. Go to where the best go. Athletes Care Sports Medicine Clinics with 24 locations in the Greater Toronto Area and in Ottawa. Hey, if you missed any parts of the show, don't worry. Visit our website at overtimepodcast.ca, where you can both listen and subscribe to future shows. 7-Eleven's Overtime Podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. As well, please check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel at O-Time Podcast. Until next week, I'm Gino Reda saying so long, hockey fans, and thanks for joining us on the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast.